There's a great quote that I once heard, and it goes something like this: "Don't try to ask people for directions that have never gone to where you're trying to go." So the general idea of this quote is to sort of remind you of the fact that sometimes when you're taking in a source of information, or when you're trying to use something as a piece of advice to improve yourself, you need to understand that some people may have an ulterior motive to provide you with that information, or sometimes people are not even qualified to give you that advice to begin with. So in this video, I want to briefly explore this idea, and I want to give you 4 steps that I normally use to be able to evaluate a source of information to see whether it's valid and whether or not it's a sort of a source of information that you should use for actionable advice going forward. So before even examining the information that a particular source or person is giving you, the main question that I like to ask first is, what do you honestly think this person's intention is for providing you this information? Now, I know on the surface this may seem like some sort of a statement that may evoke suspicion immediately and sort of frame somebody in a bad light, but that's not what it's really designed to do. This sort of question is designed to evoke a feeling of curiosity about the real nature behind the information that the person is trying to give you. We live in an age right now where there's a lot of internet marketers, there's a lot of wannabe gurus that are going to provide you a ton of information for free, and a lot of times that information is designed and sort of given to you in a way that is designed to evoke a particular response from you. So for example, if we take, an example of an internet marketing guru who promises that you're gonna make, $50,000 a month in the first month if you buy his program, the information that he's presenting you right off the bat, while it may be useful, and it may actually provide you with a little bit of upfront value in terms of how you should act in the future, the actual information itself is really designed to convince you that his product or his program may be worth, the upfront investment of $5,000 in order to, for example, net you a return of 5 times as much or 10 times as much. So in general, this kind of question is designed to sort of get the gears turning, and it's something that I usually like to ask at the beginning of any sort of endeavor that I take on, where I'm going to be learning a lot of information or some sort of a skill, whether it be from a channel, whether it be from a person, whether it be from a book, some sort of author or public speaker. Now, this isn't to say that everybody has bad intentions for you when you first start out in self-development and when you start out in absorbing information. But in general, what I just want you to get used to is critically examining the sources of information before you even start considering the context of what that source of information is providing you with. Now, step number 2 comes after you've already examined to see whether or not this person or whatever the source of information is, whether they actually have, I suppose, relatively good intentions for you to learn from them. Now, if you find out that this person or this source of information is just trying to sell you crap, and they're basically providing you with a few useful tidbits of information in exchange for either your email address or just to sell you something, and I suppose you can just disregard at that point. But suppose we got past the first step, and you've effectively screened that source of information for any sort of potential pitfalls or sort of negative negative connotations that are going to built into the communication medium. So suppose you got past that first step. The second thing that I like to do is I like to actually evaluate to see whether or not the speaker or the author, whatever the source is actually credible enough and actually has the experience to be able to provide me with the advice and the information, or possibly the how-to to perform whatever activity that it is that I'm going to do, or whatever it is that I'm learning from. The reason why this step is really important is because you need to make sure that this person is just not spoon-feeding you crap, and they're not basically putting you on this false path with expectations that are completely blown out of reality, and something that's just basically going to lead to failure and to frustration in the future. So the example that I like to use is somebody who looks like they've never done a push-up before, and somebody who you know for a fact appears on videos they've never exercised before. Do you think you're really going to take advice from that person as to, for example, the proper form that you should have on squats or on deadlifts, or how to build a set of six-pack abs? Generally, the answer is going to be no. Now, as a few of you may point out, it's a very big possibility that that person may be a personal trainer or somebody who has the theoretical background and the education and the knowledge to be able to provide you with that type of guidance without actually having done that themselves. Now, and that's perfectly good, and that's actually something that I was about to talk to you guys about next. And And when you're examining to see the competence of a person, it's not only just physical competence or purely, hands-on skills that you need to examine. You need to examine the theoretical background. You need to look at the knowledge. You need to kind of look and see at the overall package that the speaker or that source is going to be bringing to you before you start considering whether or not that's actually something that you want to engage with. So just to kind of recap, step number 2 is to examine and to see whether or not the source of information that you're trying to get, get any sort of skills or know-how from is actually qualified enough to be able to provide you with that information. So, suppose you've screened the information source or the person that you're getting information from. Suppose you've screened them for whether or not they have good intentions and sort of what their overall demeanor is towards providing you this information. And suppose you've determined that yes, they are a qualified source to provide you with this information. They have the know-how, they have the skills, maybe the theoretical background to provide you with this information. Suppose you've gone past those 2 steps. What's next? Okay, well, step number 3, and this is something that I typically like to critically evaluate as well, is to examine and see whether or not the information that's being provided is actually relevant to you. Now, what do I mean by this? Very frequently, as human beings, people have the tendency to evaluate themselves as more competent at a particular given activity than what they actually may be. And this has been psychologically proven in a huge amount of studies. And it's something that could be akin to a cognitive bias that we all have. It's basically this perception that we're more competent than we really are. So when you're evaluating to see whether or not this information pertains to you, you need to actually very critically examine and see, okay, listen, the information that I'm being provided with, is this something that's going to be practically useful and relevant to me? So as an example, I like to use either bodybuilding or weightlifting or some sort of sports for these kind of analogies because they work quite well. Suppose that you're watching a video and you are somebody who's looking to get fit. However, the video is trying to explain to you the ins and outs of, say, for example, periodization and kind of the ins and outs of macronutrient densities and the exact nutrient timing that you need in order to make sure that your insulin response is just correct in order for you to get the most optimal recovery after, suppose, a heavy workout that requires you to squat for 2 hours straight. Now, seems like a far-fetched situation, but you may start already notice that, hey, listen, most of this information is probably not going to be very practical or very relevant to me at this given point in time, especially since you may, for example, be a person who's just starting out, maybe just learning how to even show up to the gym consistently, maybe even learning what all the machines do. So in this particular step, the step number 3, you need to actually critically evaluate and see, listen, is the information that's being provided to me, is it even relevant to what I'm trying to accomplish? And if for some reason you determine, hey, listen, this information is valuable, it's credible, it's useful, but it's just not particularly relevant to me at the time, it's perfectly okay to still engage with the content and still look and see what it can teach you. But at the same time, you can also put that kind of on the side burner and maybe go look for other content that's a little bit more relevant to your skill level. So another quote that I have read a long time ago that stuck with me is, make sure you don't consume any sort of information or content for which you're not the target consumer of. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, here's the big issue that lies kind of at the core of social media and at the core of the internet as it stands right now. Marketing and internet marketing in general is notoriously bad for creating a false sense of urgency or a fake need that you never even knew that you had, and then providing you with a product or a solution that sort of satisfies that need. So that is digital marketing 101, is you basically create a sense of urgency or a need in a customer that they otherwise would not have had. You evoke this fear of either missing out, or you show them images of popularity and the images sort of this satisfaction if they buy a new car or a new item, and then you basically provide them with a solution to that manufactured problem. So when you're considering information sources, I just want you to make sure that you're not consuming information that typically may not be meant for you. So if you notice that for some reason the information source evokes a lot of negative feelings, or if you just kind of have a gut feeling that sets you off about possibly any kind of ulterior motives that the speaker or the source of information has, I want you to disengage with it, and I want you to be very careful, and I want you to critically analyze why you may feel that way, because in reality, most of us have a pretty good intuition. Our bullshit detector, so to speak, most of the time is quite accurate, especially if you are very cognizant of the the message that kind of gets read between the lines that a speaker has. Now, the fourth and final step that I usually take when I take into account any new information sources or any new pieces of information that I'm trying to learn is after I've gone through the first 3 steps, I then typically take the information that I've learned and I look for ways to apply it in a practical and in a measurable manner. So the reason why I like to do this is to sort of avoid the whole armchair theorist type lifestyle where you just sit there and you absorb all the information that you possibly can, you read all the concepts and you become an expert on a given topic without actually having done it. In my opinion, this is something that all of us are bad for, and I will be the first person to admit to you and let you know that I have spent years doing this, and I can say with a sense of complete certainty that this is going to get you nowhere. What I want you to do is I want you to take the advice and take the information that you learn, and I want you to start applying it immediately. So if you look at a fitness video that teaches you how to do push-ups or pull-ups or how to get more fit or how to be more consistent in the gym, I want you to make a plan as to how you're going to take that advice and integrate it immediately into your life. There's nothing more disappointing than reading the same piece of information over and over and over again over the span of months or years, and then realizing that this piece of information was the key to your success after finally implementing it maybe a year or 2 down the road. Because at that point you start to realize how much time and opportunity you may have actually wasted by just not engaging with that right off the bat. So in this 4th step, you need to set a measurable criteria. You need to set concrete practical steps as to how you're going to apply this information if you think it's truly useful. And what I want you to also do is I want you to make sure not to overload yourself with information when you're first learning new things. You need to take things bit by bit, and taking one small piece of information and applying it into your life immediately is going to have a much bigger result and is going to have a much bigger impact on your life than, for example, if you were to read 10 or 15 different books and you're to be aware of the information, but you were to do nothing about it. So hopefully you guys found these 4 steps useful. I'm really happy to be able to share these things with you, and I'm going to be putting out a lot more content in the future that sort of shares these different mindsets and these procedures that I mentally go through when I'm trying to learn new things. And I want to thank you again for subscribing to this channel. If you haven't already, the subscribe button is just down below. And I want to thank you for your time and attention, and I hope you guys have a great day.